Well, welcome everyone to this Wikidata and civic tech session. And I shouldn't be playing favorites, but I think this might be my favorite session of the Data Reuse Days, because it's about using Wikidata to build cool stuff that makes civic society better, and that is amazing. We have 6 cool projects here who are gonna introduce what they're doing, how they're using Wikidata, and so on for a bit. And then we will do questions for all of them at the very end. And we will start with a project called Comparative Legislators Database, which provides information about political representatives, and that is collected primarily through Wikipedia and Wikidata. Let's hear it about Comparative Legislators Database.
Okay, hi everyone. Thanks for the introduction. Let me just share my screen. So, and please let me know if you can't hear me or something like that.
We can hear you.
Okay, great.
And we can see your screen.
And that should be full screen. Okay. So first of all, thanks so much for inviting us to present our work here. That's a really great initiative. We're really happy to be part of this. My name is Sascha, and this is joint work with Simon Munzert, who may also join us later, and Sebastian Ramirez, who is the latest addition to the team, but he will not join us today. We're all political scientists working at different universities in Germany, and I'm going to present this joint project, the Comparative Legislators Database. And I will start with briefly outlining what this database is about, and then I will say a few words about why we actually do this, what motivated us to work at this, how we actually collect the data. This is where Wikidata comes in, what challenges we're facing, we face and are still facing with this, and what we are currently working on. So in a nutshell, the Comparative Legislators Database is a database providing structured individual level information on national politicians. So far, it covers 10 countries with roughly about 45,000 politicians, both contemporary and historical. And in total, there are 338 legislative sessions covered. And depending on the parliament that we look at, it starts in 1789 and goes until 2020. A specific feature of this database is that we've integrated this with several other existing data sets, mainly from political science, which gives it some added utility. And also it's analysis-ready data. So this comes in rectangular shape, so just tables where the rows are politicians, the columns are variables. And currently this is only accessible really through an R package called Legislator, which provides targeted access just in a few lines of code. But we're working on opening this up a bit more. So content-wise, what this database covers is political information, social demographic, career information, online presence, public attention, also visual information. I won't get into too much detail here. What you see here is kind of the outline. So we don't have this all stored in one table. It's actually several tables, several spreadsheets, storing different kinds of information, but they're all linked via individual IDs. So this is basically a relational database, which is just a more efficient way for storing and accessing these data. And the tables and data fields that you see that are colored in yellow, these are the data. This is the information that comes directly from Wikidata. So a big chunk of this data actually is drawn directly from Wikidata, and I will explain in a minute how we do this. So what got us into this? So how did we get the idea for working at this? So this was actually a few years ago when Simon and I were working on a project where we were studying how politicians use the Wikipedia for political advertising. And we were actually focusing on the Wikipedia revision histories of politicians' biographies. But while working on this, we recognized that there's actually plenty of data lying around on Wikipedia, basic data on politicians, and then we went on and found that there's also lots more to have on Wikidata. And so, being political scientists, we thought that we know from colleagues and from our own work that this data is actually in high demand. So we thought that this could actually make a great resource. But still, we weren't too sure like how big the demand is. So what we did was a little survey of data use, legislator data use in top political science journals. And we see that there's, or we recognize that there's actually kind of more or less a steady demand. It's slightly declining, but there still is some demand for this data, and there has been some demand in the past. And we digged a bit deeper and found that like an overwhelming share of this data collection is just own efforts by scholars. So they are not resorting to existing databases. Very little of this is actually country comparative, really often US focused, and there's also some recency bias here. And this resonated with the data landscape at that time. And then we thought, okay, so building this database using Wikidata and Wikipedia can actually help fill some gap here and offer a resource for scholars so that they don't have to go back and do the work again and again, and maybe have some more comparative and some more historical data at hand as well. How do we collect this? So what we do is that we always start from Wikipedia. And you might wonder why not start with Wikidata. This is a bit more detailed problem, which I can get into later. But we always start from Wikipedia from what we call index pages. So for many parliaments, Wikipedia just has a page with all the members of parliament for a specific session. And here we typically collect the links to these members of parliament. And from there, we basically crawl this and get the Wikidata ID and the Wikipedia page ID. And we use this to then, in a second step, primarily collect data from Wikidata, from the Wikidata API. And we do some cleaning and integrate this in one database. So there's a principled way of collecting this data, systematic. It's the same for every country. But we do run into some challenges here, so which are two specifically also related to Wikidata. The one is rather minor, the other is a bit of a bit bigger problem. So data quality, we validated our data against, to the extent that this is possible, against existing data sets. And we found that generally this is comparable to existing manual data collections, which is a good thing. If you consider manual data collection a gold standard. There are erroneous entries on Wikidata, but we find that they're really rare. And this mismatch finder tool that was introduced, I think, yesterday or so, seems pretty promising to us. So this may actually help in dealing with this data quality issue because it's actually really rare. A bigger problem for us is really the data availability thing. So one thing that we find is that there is a differential data availability between Wikipedia and Wikidata. So one reason why we actually collect data, why we start from Wikipedia, is that we need to know which parliamentary term or session a politician belongs to. And this data is available on Wikidata, but it's not as consistently available for every person, every country, and every parliamentary session on Wikidata. At least not last time we checked. Maybe something changed there, and then we can actually adjust our data collection procedure. But this is really a big issue because the biggest work really goes into scraping these Wikipedia index pages, because the table formatting is different for every country, often for every session. It's really a big mess. And this is much easier going through Wikidata, just tapping the API. There's also some overrepresentation of Western legislatures. So African parliaments, for instance, are hardly covered. And we also find some recency bias. So of course, more recent legislatures are better covered. And other data that is maybe interesting for social scientists, like person's religious affiliation or their ethnicity, is hardly populated, but we can understand that this is maybe information that shouldn't be available on Wikidata. Another thing is that we think that contributing data in bulk on Wikidata seems to be difficult or maybe not even possible. We know that there are colleagues in political science who are sitting on data sets for countries, data which is not even available on Wikipedia, maybe even for, like I said, African parliaments. But of course, they will not sit down and like enter this data like field by field into Wikidata. So if there's ever anything, any work in development in this direction, like really contributing data in bulk to Wikidata, I think this would help a lot for this project. So to wrap up, I want to give an outlook. So what we're working on right now for the second version, this is scheduled for summer this year. So we're updating the existing data. So we will have 5 new legislative sessions. We also add 5 new countries, plus the complete history of the European Parliament in terms of the members there in the sessions. And we correct several errors, which are actually just a few due to Wikidata mostly providing pretty accurate data. And we'll also launch a website. Currently, we don't have a website for this. And there we will grant data access also in CSV and SQL format, so that you don't have to be an R user to actually get this data. And we will also provide tutorials on contributing data to the CLD and Wikidata. And we are still not super sure how we want to do this. So we're working on this, but if you have any suggestions how to encourage people to actually contribute to Wikidata so that we can actually just update our data set, that would be great. Okay, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much for giving us some insights into your project. If you have questions, please do add them to the Etherpad. We will get to them at the end. And we will continue with Govdirectory. Jan and Albin, are you there? Yay.
We're here.
Cool, then let's go.
Yay. Yes, we are here, and we are here to present the project Govdirectory. And just before we start, in case someone wants to follow the presentation directly in their browser for some reason, the link is now in the chat, so one can click that and easily follow along in their own way. And with that, go ahead, Jan.
Yes, so you might have a problem in asking yourself the question, which were the countries Norway exported war materials to in 2019?
Or you're asking yourself, were the largest CO2 emitters in Sweden?
And for all these important questions, who do you ask them? And where do you ask them?
And this is what we asked ourselves when we got started on building Govdirectory, the easiest way to contact your government.
So our target group in this version is sort of the active citizen, or perhaps an activist, like someone who's a representative for the general public, but is a little bit more like an early adapter for policy change, who wants to engage to make the society better. So yeah, that's our main target group.
So why is Govdirectory the solution, and how does it work with Wikidata?
So it's a crowdsourced and fact-checked directory of official government online accounts and services. It's built on Wikidata and co-curated and with the Wikimedia community. And for now, it's only data from Wikidata.
So what does Govdirectory? It helps you take the first step to start a conversation with government. It helps you identify a government agency responsible for your issue. And it helps you make your concerns public and put pressure on the people responsible.
And our vision is very much connected to the Sustainable Development Goals, and in particular, goal number 16, about peace, justice, and strong institutions. And we formulated it very inspired by that goal, a world where people are empowered to engage with the government to ensure responsive, inclusive, participatory, and representative decision-making at all levels.
So while the goal over time is to have information about all of the government agencies in the world, we currently have a couple of countries, 15 at this moment, and some information about them, and basic information about context about the countries and about each of the organizations. We also list a huge amount of online account and services, which we do collect in Wikidata. We allow people to discover government agencies by topic and country. We make it easier for people to give feedback and suggest improvements in Wikidata itself. And this is, of course, all because of the community which curates this data in Wikidata, which everyone can edit.
So let's try a little bit of live demo. You can try this yourself at home as well. It's all available already on govdirectory.org. And if you have any questions, put them in the Etherpad. So here we are now, live on our webpage. And you recognize some of the images here. And you see these are the countries we have right now. And we've divided up on these 10 topics for now. We'll see how we develop that over time. And another view from the countries are these listed in alphabetical order. And let's jump into Sweden, shall we? Because that's one of the more complete countries. We have a little bit of an info box in the top, giving you some basic information. And then we have a long list of agencies, and you can see the colorful icons for social media accounts. And this is, of course, a little bit too long to scroll through. So you could also go back up to the top here and filter perhaps for environment or something like that. And head over to the Environmental Protection Agency, and we have a similar info box telling you who's the parent organization, the website, phone, who is it led by, in this case, a general director, how are they regulated, link to Wikipedia, and of course, the meat here, the platforms and accounts, so you can contact them. And if you want to raise an issue, report a problem, this is a link to Wikidata talk page, or here just to the Wikidata item if you want to edit it yourself. Do you want to talk a little bit more about the topics, Albin?
Yeah, sure. So this is something that Wikidata didn't really model the way we currently do it when we got started on Govdirectory, because we decided to use a classification by the So we actually imported those from scratch, and it's something we're currently evaluating a little bit on how does those work for Discover. And let's try to click something. Right, so environments, we can actually see that we have a bunch of government agencies related to environment, and this does not use something like field of work in Wikidata, but rather this UN classification that we use.
Yes.
Right.
So let's switch back to our presentation here again.
And quickly about myself and Jan, as we have been having very much the privilege over the last year to work on Govdirectory quite a lot. And while the project is open to everyone, we kind of got started on it, but everything is CC0 and we don't consider ourselves owner of it. And we are open knowledge enthusiasts with very much roots in the Wikimedia movement, which both have been working both at government, on national and EU level.
And we have produced quite a lot of documentation on GitHub, where the code for the website and some other tools lives. We have a fairly nice README and a detailed contributing file, and also how you do if you want to add a country on the website. And similarly on Wiki, we also have a way, some guides for you to how do you model your country to be ready to add on the website, and some example queries as well that will help you when you get started.
And we do, of course, think that you should check out Govdirectory and add your questions to the Etherpad. But in case you end up having questions later on or after nights of sleep, then here's our contact details, and this presentation will stay at this URL.
And I think we were really lightning talk.
Amazing. Thank you so much, guys. It's really cool to see how you're helping people be more engaged in government topics and make their voices heard. And with that, we are moving on to OpenSanctions.
Yeah, hi everybody.
Yeah.
OpenSanctions is sort of what the name says. 4 weeks ago, it used to be a somewhat obscure hobby to care about international sanctions. I think that's kind of changed a little bit in the meantime. But the idea is that sanctions data is actually quite interesting for a broad range of people. That includes journalists, for example, activists, but also business that is in the financial sector. So the reason, for example, as a journalist that you would care about sanctions data is that it's great contrast material. So think about being an investigator and working on the Panama Papers or one of its successor projects, and suddenly you have 12 million emails that you need to go through. So you want to find all the emails that contain the name of someone interesting. And one of the ways of doing that is to look at people that are on sanctions lists, because they, by definition, are at least interesting to someone in the world and probably have been up to kind of interesting and no good things. In more recent days, this has actually escalated, of course. So now there's this kind of veritable scramble to figure out what are the assets, for example, held by Russian oligarchs in different countries, in an effort to basically seize these assets and hopefully kind of induce some political pressure inside of Russia to seize its war against Ukraine. Wishful thinking maybe, but there's a big debate about how effective sanctions are as a tool of policymaking. But yes, so one of the things that OpenSanctions has been up to in the last a month or so is kind of tracking that development of sanctions and seeing how do different countries impose sanctions, who are their targets, and how comprehensive is their coverage. So how does this relate to Wikidata? I want to talk about it in two ways a little bit. One is how it feeds into Wikidata, and the other is how we kind of benefit of Wikidata and make that part of our corpus. So in terms of how we contribute to Wikidata, OpenSanctions now is more or less a partnership with this other initiative that kind of runs by the name Peppercat. And the idea there is that there's a gentleman who used to run a project called Every Politician that would try and assemble data on every parliament in the world, and is running this slightly mad set of different scrapers for, well, in theory, every government and every cabinet and every parliament in the world. And then basically every night generates a diff between what is on the website of that government and what is in Wikidata, and then goes and provides that information into Wikidata. This is obviously a work in progress. It is by no means complete. One of the particularly cool things about this is that it's trying to kind of introduce a somewhat coherent structure on how data about office holders is structured in Wikidata, right? So that you can basically query, if you have a set of offices that you're interested in, let's say the head of government, the minister of X, Y, and Z, or the head of the central bank, then obviously there's like a standardized property for expressing that in Wikidata, so you can kind of query that across different countries quite easily. And so that's one effort, is to kind of put a lot of this material into Wikidata. And the reason this is interesting to OpenSanctions is because sanctions data is only one part of that puzzle. The other part of that puzzle is always what's in kind of financial crime slang called politically exposed people, right? So you're trying to figure out who are people who have access to spend government money, and then you're trying to see how many offshore accounts do they have, essentially how many millions have they stored in Switzerland, to be very blunt about it. And in order to do that, what we do is we read data sets from Peppercat, which provides us basically the Wikidata QIDs for everybody who's an office holder in country X, Y, and Z, and then import that into OpenSanctions. So we have these two data sets. World leaders is basically people who are in the executive, so that's cabinets and some key functions like heads of military and central banks. And then we have legislators, which is not yet kind of as well supported with scrapers, but the idea is to kind of replicate a list of cabinet of legislative members in every country as much as we can do. And so we're kind of feeding that data through Wikidata into OpenSanctions, where then people can use it to do checks. And in the end, what falls out is are these kind of profiles, and these are not meant to be super readable. They're meant to provide kind of coalesced information from as many sources as possible. And in particular, what we do is kind of we take the details that might come from Wikidata. So, for example, Wikidata is really fantastic in terms of the aliases you get for anyone. And we take data that comes from other sources. For example, this is kind of the set of sanctions that apply to the Russian president at the moment. So you can see he's been sanctioned by the Swiss, the Canadians, the Europeans, etc., etc., and provide these kind of integrated profiles. You can see here also, for example, that we're trying to provide some information on family members, because one of the common practices in stealing government money is that you would not hide it in your own name, but rather that you would hide it with a family member, right? So, for example, this is the son-in-law of Putin, who, after marrying Putin's daughter, quickly became a billionaire, then divorced, and is now seeing something of a career setback. So, yeah, it kind of correlates very well. What you might have already noticed is actually that up here in the ID for that particular entry in OpenSanctions, there's something very suspicious looking, and that's a Wikidata ID. So we kind of use Wikidata IDs as the authoritative IDs for all people in Wikidata, not for companies, because I think companies are we have to treat them as like these very legalese constructs where Coca-Cola company would be 2,000 companies rather than one. But yeah, you can see here that it's kind of just the reference to Wikidata, and I mentioned before, like the key to us is often this kind of position held property, where we're kind of able to say, give me all the presidents of Russia since 1991, right? What's been enabled by this in the last little while, what I find really amazing is kind of that there's been a lot of different projects that have sort of used Wikidata as spine data. So, for example, this is a project called Declarator that's run by Transparency International in Russia, and today they published a new feature to their website that now shows all of the countries that have sanctioned an individual, and they're pulling this from OpenSanctions by the virtue of the fact that they already had Wikipedia links in there, which obviously you can then resolve into Wikidata IDs. And so that kind of means that like a Russian NGO can now really quickly pull in sanctions information. What's even a bit weirder is that, for example, the Ukrainian Anti-Corruption Agency, I think at the moment, is also pulling that information and basically generating their own lists of candidates for the next rounds of sanctioning. So at that point, they then kind of feed that to European authorities and to US authorities. And this is kind of how sanctions are born. So in that way, kind of, having these spine IDs of Q7747 has proved to be kind of essential in terms of being able to cooperate right now around kind of talking about who are sanctioned individuals, what other information do we have about them, what kind of associated entities can we find, and also kind of just for people to keep track of it in the last 4 weeks. I want to finally kind of bring up this thing here, which is basically an attempt to define like what are oligarchs, and this obviously is like a very political question, but I think it's also an important one to look at if you want to see like, okay, how comprehensive has the sanctioning policy been. You kind of need a baseline. You need to be able to say that 37% of oligarchs have been sanctioned at this point. And frankly, what most people end up doing is they end up using this, which is kind of a list released by Forbes every year of Russian billionaires. And then you kind of get into an argument about whether anyone who's a billionaire in Russia is also automatically an oligarch. But you can kind of just see here the people that are kind of at the key of current sanctions and future sanctions. And if anyone wants to do some very weird Ukraine-related volunteering, what I would kind of invite people to consider is to just adopt an oligarch, right? To go in here and say, okay, I'm interested in this gentleman, right? And let me actually go in here and add to Wikidata as much detail as possible. In particular, what we're interested in, as I mentioned before, is kind of family relationships, to kind of know who are the associates of that individual, who are the family of that individual. And that way to be able to kind of do a better job at eventually kind of tracking those assets that usually are in the name of family or are in the name of associates rather than in the name of the oligarch or the billionaire themselves. And so basically what's true, I don't know if this is great to admit from a security perspective, if you edit one of these profiles at the moment and you add more family information there from news reporting or from official biographies, then you have a pretty good chance that within 48 hours that would be somewhere in a sanctions authority in the world and be considered for inclusion in the future, which is pretty weird, but also kind of interesting. Yeah, so that's kind of a brief introduction to OpenSanctions, and it's a project that's really kind of benefited a lot from using Wikidata. One thing that we haven't done yet, but that I really want to do, is to kind of find more ways of feeding the information on sanctions and who is being sanctioned back into those Wikidata items. And that's also something that if someone really wants to take a stab at it, I'm super happy to talk. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Very, very timely work, of course, and it's really cool to see Wikidata being used in this area and helping make the world better and more transparent. And with that, we go to Open Parliament TV. Let me pull up the slides for you.
Thank you for helping out, Lydia.
No worries. There you go.
So yeah, here we go. So I'm Joseph. Joscha got ill, so all the best to him. I knew 6 or 7 hours ago that I'm holding this talk, so this is very roughly put together. So next slide, please. So what is Open Parliament TV? Open Parliament TV is basically just a search engine for parliamentary speeches. So you can search and you can interlink parliamentary speeches between different parliaments. That's the plan. And next slide, please. So we want to make parliamentary debates, which are often quite inaccessible, hidden in various places in the parliamentary mediatheks. So we are making them more publicly available, transparent, accessible, and machine readable. And we are enriching them with other data. Next slide, please. So right now, the problem with these parliamentary speeches is that on the one hand, you got these videos in some kind of recorded sessions. And on the other hand, you have the official parliamentary debate text PDFs that are in kind of PDFs or other formats that are kind of unusable. And we are putting those two separate departments, these separate data together. Next slide, please. So generally we have, so there's no connection between the recordings and the spoken text and the proceedings right now, and it's very hard to search them in the content, and every speech is hidden in some really big PDFs, and it's making them hard or impossible to find, to link, or to embed certain speeches. So next slide, please. So what should you do? Of course, you should sync them together. So we're syncing video recordings and the protocols together and aligning them in a quite decent manner. Next slide, please. So yes, next slide, please. So we're having interactive transcripts and making them shareable, and you can share and highlight certain parts of a speech and share them, and you can link them with different documents and additional data. And yeah, that's possible only on Open Parliament TV. Next slide, please. So, and of course, like Pudu said, for OpenSanctions, we're also using the identifiers of Wikidata for identifying the members of parliament in the URL. So you're having this QID for the members of parliament as well here. And there was a blog post some weeks ago on the Wikimedia website. You can look it up. It's in German for some more details about linking data from Wikidata to Open Parliament TV. Next slide, please. So what's Open Parliament TV is looking like? It looks like an index-based search engine. You can look up their words. For example, Zeitenwende, a German word which became quite popular some weeks ago for some reason. And yeah, you can look up certain words, certain phrases, filter them by the parliamentary groups or some by the time frame, and yeah, can watch them all as binge watching. So yeah, feel free to use it in your own way. Next slide, please. So what we are looking for, we are looking for a better place to make parliamentary debates more accessible and link them between different parliaments. For example, there are a lot of debates happening in different state parliaments, for example, on the same topic, or it's happening debates on state levels and on the European level that are close interconnected, but it's right now quite difficult to have the links between all these different parliamentary debates in different levels and different states. And that's our goal, not just to host the data of one parliament like the Bundestag right now, but of more state parliaments, German Landtage, or other parliaments who are on different levels. Next slide, please. So this is it, and happy to stay in touch and open for your questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I think binge watching German Parliament TV is gonna be a thing. Thank you. And with that, we are continuing with, give me a second, party facts. Let's hear it about party facts. We cannot hear you yet.
So,
yes.
Now I hope you see the screen and
yes.
Can hear me. So thanks also a lot for inviting me. It's a very good and interesting opportunity to talk about important applications of Wikipedia and Wikidata in the social sciences. Actually, I just found out that the project that I'm going to present, Party Facts, started in 2012 when Wikidata also started. So what is Party Facts doing for social scientists? Or it's an academic process. In the social sciences, we have political parties in very many different data sources. So we have them in surveys, we have them in election results, we have politicians. We have seen some presentations here before already, where also some of the actors and politicians are affiliated with political parties. Social scientists actually spend a lot of their valuable research time on doing simple things like combining data sets. Actually, when the project started in 2012, Wikidata was just starting. What we wanted to do is to collect information about all relevant political parties in the world, so which we defined as parties that won more than 5% in a national election. We wanted to provide an opportunity to link various existing data sources from the social scientists, the party-based information. So you see the screenshot where we are currently. So currently we have we are linking 58 data sets. We have included about 5,700 what we call core parties. So these are the parties that we have gathered and collected, and we linked them to about 40,000 parties in external data sets that are in data sets. And the information relies to a significant degree, particularly for the curation of the data, on Wikipedia and Wikidata. So one of the data sets that we link to and that we include is information from Wikipedia, and similar to the first presentation on the legislators. We also start from the Wikipedia because one of the information that is important for us is we cannot or don't want to include all parties in the world. So I will talk about that later. So we limit it only to relevant parties. And there, usually the Wikipedia page also provides some information on the size of the party. And also, we often found out that the info box information in Wikipedia contains more information than the respective Wikidata element for a political party. And that's why we rely on info boxes from the Wikipedia page and the partially the Wikidata entry. So, and you see here on the right-hand side, I have added some screenshots what the project is doing. So that is the web page that social scientists can have a look at it, that we link the correct parties. And for example, so the party of the current German Chancellor, the Social Democratic Party from Wikipedia, is linked to 48 political science data sets. And you can also download this information in a structured way. And there is an accompanying GitHub project where we extract the party information from the different data sites. So that's what PartyFacts is about. And a thing that's probably to listeners maybe more relevant research-wise, what comes out from Wikipedia. So here it is, the application are info boxes, but it could potentially also be feasible with information that is provided by Wikidata. So that's a publication that I worked on with a colleague from the University of Constance, where we use the ideology classification of Wikipedia and Wikidata, and then derive left-right positions of political parties for them. So we use the classifications from Wikipedia and Wikidata, download that, and then in the paper we suggest a new social science approach to derive purely from these classifications left-right positions of political parties. So far in the presentation, I have focused on kind of an inner social science perspective. So PartyFacts, so far we have used Wikidata and Wikipedia, and this has solved a problem for social scientists, but it has probably wider implications that I want to discuss. Or the basic problem that PartyFacts wants to address and that PartyFacts addresses for the major political parties of the world is basically the Wikidata Promise. So it is the promise or the hope to provide a knowledge graph for the social sciences. So ideally, many of the entities and concepts we study in the social science, such as politicians, political parties, we have seen firms before. So we have them as very heterogeneous entities with different identifiers in various social science sources. And Wikidata is really the promise to kind of support a lot of manual work or replace it through offering a structured platform, superseding things that we as social scientists are currently doing through something like Partifacts. So I would say, as someone who has worked on social science data for 15 years, so the promise of Wikidata is definitely there. But I would also say that social scientists are not there yet. So the concepts that Wikidata relies on, the technical ways of making it fully and widely accessible, I think there are not, they cannot be used by social scientists at this point. So social scientists have also gone into data scientists. They are more familiar with modern tools like Python and R. But the experience that we had from this project is that Wikidata, so some of the concepts and also technical things are rather hard to access. And for example, you will see that I have here on the right-hand side of the slide provided the Wikidata screenshot of the Social Democratic Party that I showed earlier. And in Wikidata, you have this identifier of other core data sources to a particular Wikidata entry. And to the best of my knowledge, you will find almost no social science data sets there. Although, as Sascha said in the initial presentation, there is a lot of data and information out there. But we as social scientists, we are not adding or linking it to Wikidata yet, because I think we need more accessible tools and we need more best cases and examples to truly and thoroughly be able to contribute to Wikidata. And it is a very, very important and valuable things that I hope social scientists will pick up more in the future. So I have links to some of the things I mentioned here at the final slide, and thank you for your attention, and I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your insights into party data. Which brings us to our final project of today, which is Ideograph. Do you want to tell us about Ideograph?
Yes, hello, thank you. Thank you for the invitation. So just a personal little project in data visualization, which I've called Ideograph, and it's about exploring the ideologies and political parties with SparkQL queries to Wikidata using D3 and Pixie.js. So this is what the interface or the visualization looks like. Basically, here you have two types of nodes in a graph visualization. The red nodes are ideologies, the blue nodes are political parties. The sizes of the red dots, which are the ideologies, depend on the number of connected links. So this is how the Wikidata is presented. The organization of the graph, for those of you who don't know, graph visualization techniques, it's a force-directed graphs. So basically, you have all those nodes of political parties and ideologies, which are organized by underlying physical forces. You have a repulsion force, that is the nodes have exercised repulsion to each other, so they drift further apart. You have a gravity force which pulls the nodes to the center, and finally you have an attraction force, which means that if two dots of two nodes of this graph are linked in some way, they are attracted to each other, which results in a visualization that groups political parties that share similar ideologies. It also groups ideologies that are shared by multiple parties. And globally, the more peripheral ideologies will get on the outside or the periphery of this node representations, and ideologies which are in the center, that means that they are either consensual or that they are shared by many parties that have different views or are attached to very different ideologies. So what is central does not necessarily mean consensuality. It can also mean that it is shared by many parties. The application, which is online, gives you also the possibility to filter by country and to provide, to access the data via a direct link. So, for example, here we have the political parties of Poland and Romania, which are selected. You can only focus on that specific country if you want. You can also hyperlink the access to this data. A couple of observations. Of course, if you, as a political scientist, if you explore this this data, you can find out many interesting things. I can give you just two examples. For example, one of the striking observations which I've made is that Euroscepticism was quite a central node, which means that the Euroscepticism seems to be the ideological heart of Europe. It is shared by many parties on all extreme sides of the political spectrum, from the far right to the far left, or to the far liberal. Let's say many polarized parties in other regards share one common thing, which would be Euroscepticism if you look at this graph representation. Another observation, I've noticed that the idea of environmentalism is on the opposite side of nationalism and fascism. This environmentalism is very linked to social democracy. It can also be linked to liberalism to some extent. And it seems almost as an opposite political stance to nationalism and fascism, which are on the other side of the graph. On the side of the technology, how I explore Wikidata, it's basically relying on the relation political or the type of node, which is the political ideology. You have a short excerpt, actually the whole Sparkle query, which I addressed to Wikidata to get this data. I verify, I've noticed that some things identified as political ideologies were actually not really political ideologies according to other tags. So I made a double check using another Wikidata relation. I verify that the entity which is linked to the political ideology is a political party or a European political party, and the relation P31 just a instance of one of those elements. For the another technical aspect, for the visualization of the data, I've used the framework D3, which is very widely used, which allows me to do this force-directed graph in a very performant algorithm. The non-performant side of D3 is that it uses SVG, which is quite good for standard representations, but if you have many nodes in this graph representations, the graphical engine of your browser will not follow. So one of the solutions is to use PixieGS, which is a framework that uses representations in WebGL that relies on the graphical engine of your computer, and it makes the graphical representations much more performant. During the development of this little project, I've noticed one thing many times when Sparkle queries have been made by third-party applications to Wikidata or to any other triple store, is that those Sparkle queries are generated by different scripts, or sometimes often hidden inside the script. And what I would be in favor of or propose as a good practice when providing applications using those Sparkle queries is to put them in separate RQ files, which make them easier to find, also easy to verify, easier to follow by third-party users. They're also easier to edit. And I've noticed, for example, if you're using JavaScript, which is often the case in web applications, you can basically just replace write Sparkle queries that are valid Sparkle code, but that have elements that could be dynamically replaced by your JavaScript. And it really makes the approach much easier for someone else to take over the code or understand what is happening, what data is being retrieved from Wikidata. All right, that's it. You can test the application online under the hyperlinks that you see here on the screen. As I've said, this is just a small personal project that I've realized in a couple of days, and I don't have much opportunity to develop that much further, but I've put the project on a GitHub repository. And what the project would definitely need is involvement by more people on GitHub, by other programmers for making a better graphical user interface. And as has been already stated by other presenters this evening, the Wikidata is very good, very extensive, but it would need to be developed much further in order for this tool to be really useful for a real politological exploration and visualization of the current state of political ideologies and their links to political parties. Just to make a short view of what the application actually looks like. So you can, this is the graphical interface, which is quite poor at this moment, but just gives you mostly the central point is the network that you can see. You can click on individual nodes, so you can isolate a specific ideology and see, for example, what political parties in Europe or elsewhere are linked to this ideology. You can click on the link, and then you go to you get to the Wikidata page. The same thing can be done with the political ideologies themselves. If you take Christian democracy here, for example, you click on the link and land on the page of Wikidata. And of course here, if you're willing, you can edit the data if you find errors in this representation. So it's also a tool for discovering potential errors and to bring users to participate in the editing and updating of the data on Wikidata. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much. That concludes our presentations, and it's really amazing to see all those projects, and it really helps us figure out where we can improve Wikidata with more and better data to make all these amazing projects even better. So thank you to all the speakers. And we have a bunch of questions in the Etherpad already. If you have more questions, please do add them to the Etherpad. And I will start with some questions for about the Comparative Legislators database. The first question that was asked is, if I understand the graphic of the relational model correctly, the CLD database stores the revision ID of Wikipedia articles in the table Wikipedia history. How is this information of each revision useful for CLD?
So thanks for this question. And we have two kinds of data that are probably considered rather exotic for social scientists in this data set. One is are these revision IDs, and the other is the Wikidata traffic, the Wikipedia traffic, so the actual traffic on these pages. And so for the revision IDs, we actually used this in the study that I mentioned in the presentation. So what we did was that we looked at the IP range of the parliament. So every larger organization, typically they have some IP range, like universities have an IP range, and also the parliaments have an IP range. And when someone edits something on Wikipedia that's anonymously, this is linked to an IP address, so the IP address is published. So in this project, for instance, we use these revision IDs to look which revisions are coming from the parliament, not directly from politicians, because we cannot say that, but at least coming from the parliament. So this is an example how this could be useful. And for instance, for the traffic data, we saw people using this, and colleagues of us use this to just have a proxy for popularity for politicians, so they can easily filter them. And the rationale why we included this in this data set is primarily that we wanted people to, political scientists, this is our target audience, right? And we wanted political scientists to see this data out there, this data from Wikipedia, so that it gets a bit more attention and maybe there's some creative uses out there.
Cool, thank you. Then there's another question for you. Modeling of members of parliaments is indeed quite messy in Wikidata. Since I'm currently working on members of Landtag and Bundestag, what information do you expect to have in Wikidata, and do you already have ideas on how to model it? For example, memberships in parliamentary groups. There are currently 2 ways to model this, apparently.
Yes, I think that's a rather substantive question. I don't really have an answer to this because I've never done this. I've never dealt with this, at least as far as I understand this question. But yeah, so I don't know.
That's a perfectly valid answer. Cool. Okay, then I'm not sure if this is easier or harder, but the next question for you is, do you see yourselves as political scientists first or techies first?
That's a tough one, yeah. So job-wise, so Simon, Sebastian, and me, we're political scientists. So I guess political scientists, yeah. But yeah, it kind of depends how you define techie, right? So if it's like techie, you only do what you do because you just like to do some tech stuff, then no, we're political scientists. So the drive for this work is a substantive drive. So for the Comparative Legislators database, we think this is a resource tailored to political scientists. We think that it actually helps people. We didn't just do this, and we don't continue to pursue this only because it's fun. Actually, lots of time it's not. Right, so it's a service to the profession basically, and all the other tech stuff that we do, I think, always has a substantive drive. Never like it's never just a tech exercise for us. I think, for me at least. I don't know about Simon and Sebastian, but I think it's the same for them. Makes
sense, and thank you for that service. And then the last question I have here for you is: are you already collaborating with Member of Parliament Count? Which is a tool on Toolforge at mp-count.toolforge.org. And if not, there might be good synergies to be found there.
Yes, thanks for this link. I wasn't aware of this, but I'll definitely check it out, and I'll reach out if this makes sense in any way, but definitely thanks.
Cool, thank you. Then we have a bunch of questions about Govdirectory. Let's start with, how do you decide which countries are in the directory currently?
That's the best question, I guess. For now, we're adding them when we feel that we have some sort of completeness to a set of agencies. For example, all the ministries, and that they are well modeled on Wikidata, that there's something like the most important thing is that, can we query for it? Like, is it that well modeled? That's sort of the lowest bar, but then we want to have some sort of a little bit higher quality so that we can also display things. But it doesn't need to be a complete country, so we can have parts of countries.
Cool. So if someone would want their country to be added to Govdirectory, they would start by making sure that the data in Wikidata is well modeled, and then come back to you to include it.
And it's usually easiest to start like with the ministries. There are not that many, and usually easy to find public data about. So that's a good start.
Cool. Then the next question we have is, would you like to enable people to edit Wikidata directly from your interface in the future? Do you already have an idea about how to do it?
That's also a good question. We have been thinking about it. But for now, we're focusing on making tools to editing on Wikidata easier. It makes it more transparent on where you edit and what the consequences will be if you don't behave to the community rules.
That makes sense, yeah. Cool. Then we have another question, which is, UN classification is COFOG. then you could probably link it up to government expenditures easily, how each body buys, how much money they have, and so on.
Yeah, one would wish that, but it very much depends on the country, because various countries publish their CFOG data differently. Some countries doesn't even publish it. And on the UN level, the budgets are per CFOG category rather than down to the agency.
Makes sense, yeah. And then the last question in the Etherpad here is, for Germany, there's also Frag den Staat, which is linked via property ID, Frag den Staat public body ID. And it is a portal for making freedom of information requests. Do you think that it might be worthwhile to collaborate and integrate their API as well in Govdirectory?
So this was something we wanted to do from the beginning, actually integrate with freedom of information request services. But when we came to Wikidata, we instead used a property which is just freedom of information request URL, which is much more generic and works with more than one platform. For example, there could be an official freedom of information request portal and an unofficial one, and this broader property allows us to select the information one way rather than go down to the identifier for each freedom of information portal.
Yeah, and one of the big bonuses with that is we have the same system for the whole globe rather than having one for each country.
Cool, thank you. And then someone comments that you should have a look at publicbodies.org.
Have already done it, yes, but thanks for the suggestion.
Cool. All right, then we have a question about OpenSanctions. Besides curating information of politicians and people of interest in Wikidata, is there any other way people could make OpenSanctions more useful?
Yeah, I already put one answer there, which is that it'd be cool to put more of the kind of IDs used by sanctioning authorities, especially the US OFAC, that's kind of the US Treasury Department, and the UN Security Council into Wikidata. That's kind of, yeah, the main identifiers that are used for sanction stuff. Another thing that I would point out is that a lot of kind of using the sanctions data is about fuzzy matching human names. And yeah, Wikidata has this amazingly rich corpus of aliases for human names. And so if anyone is interested in helping to work on kind of better person fuzzy matching based on like name aliases, that's also a super valuable thing that I'd love to talk to people about.
So that is names, for example, in different writing systems, but also aliases that people are using?
Yeah, exactly. So it's walking that tightrope between like getting too broad. So different writing systems, but also maybe like someone who's called Alexander then gets called Sascha as an alias, right? Cool. Or Friedrich and Fritz.
Cool, thank you. And then we have some questions about Open Parliament TV. And the first very obvious question, of course, is, are you looking to expand to other countries besides Germany?
Yes, of course. But it's depending on the resources we have. So we had an announcement shortly, accurately, that we are looking for funding, and yes, that's critical right now in the growing this project. And yes, we are looking firstly for some. We are in touch with some state parliaments and looking for some state parliaments first, maybe, and looking for international expansion as well.
That sounds great.
So,
and hopefully you get that funding.
Yeah, we'll see. Quite optimistic right now. And so there's another question.
Yeah, let me read it out for the recording. Is text linking used in the subtitles to avoid concept ambiguation? For example, if someone searches for a name that is used by 2 politicians but only wants to get results for 1 politician.
Oh, good question. Not sure about this. There's some German names like Müller or something that could be not identified. I'm not sure. I'm not sure how do we handle this right now. Sorry, can't answer this correctly in detail.
That's fine. Okay, then the next one would be, do you have any plans for expanding the usage of Wikidata in Open Parliament TV?
Yes. So as I said, we're looking for ways to add more data, more context to the speeches, and Wikidata is one of the sources we're looking for to add more data. Yes.
Excellent. And then the last question I have here for you is, who writes the subtitles for the videos? Is it provided in the government website along with the videos?
So this is not from the government, but from the parliament website. So yeah, it is from them, and there's also some different types of subtitles. So if you're looking for subtitles in the live, if you're watching live the parliamentary debates in the Bundestag, there's a live subtitling provided by the German Bundestag, and at the end, 1 or 2 days after the session where it was live, there is a official protocol by the stenographic service provided by the Bundestag. So it's always the official data we're using.
Thank you. Which brings us to a question about party facts. Do you know what are the main issues that social scientists encounter when trying to edit Wikidata? Any suggestions on what could be improved? For example, interface tools, data models, or other things?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I think it's not so much on the Wikidata page on when an entry is already there, the editing. So I would in general say social scientists are not there yet. So it would be interesting to do a study how many are aware of a Wikidata entry that is related to Wikipedia page. But I'm not too optimistic that at this point that too many social scientists are really familiar with the entire project. What my comment referred to was more what also Sascha had in his presentation with the upload thing. So I think what is linking and what is missing, particularly to the concepts that I presented, like political parties. So the quality of Wikidata currently is more heterogeneous than, for example, politicians. And as I said, so the Wikipedia infobox data is often more complete than the Wikidata. So basically, we would need tools kind of to encourage social scientists more to provide some initial data so that there is a critical mass for concepts. So I referred it here for political parties. One thing that I'm also interested in, that I regularly look up parties, are voting results. And I now saw that the concept is now available in Wiki data, but a voting result, so which party won how many seats or what seat share, that is something that is currently not structurally available. It is probably also something that could be done through from the social science perspective, starting in a cooperation. But I think people like Sascha are making the case for politicians, and that's probably the entry point. But then when we go to more heterogeneous concepts, it's more open territory.
Thank you. Which brings us to some questions about Ideograph. And the first one is, are all the political ideologies and political parties in the world represented in Ideograph?
I don't think so. This Ideograph depends totally on the Wikidata ontologies and classifications. So it's really tributary to the quality of the data. So my answer would be no, or as far it represents those ideologies only insofar as as they are known to Wikidata.
That makes sense, yes. And then we have, how do you sort out the conflict that some political parties have broken off from another political party due to personality differences, but still share the same ideology in the same country? This is a common trend in countries with extremely vibrant democracies, where party hopping by politicians is not unusual.
That is true. That's one of the aspects that would need to be tackled. Well, I've managed to isolate, for example, political parties that were no longer valid, but the historicity of the links to the ideologies would need to be inserted. To my knowledge, there is a possibility in Wikidata to indicate a time span for not only for party existence, but also for the relation to a specific ideology. And as we know, for example, if you look at the United States, you take the Republican Party. It's not a party that really stands for the values which it was founded a couple of hundred years ago. So that would be one example. There are certainly, as you say, examples elsewhere. So that means that those relations between parties and political ideologies would need to be historicized. So they would need to have a timestamp. I think that is possible. Do you confirm on the side of Wikidata?
Cool. And then the last one I have.
Sorry, that would have been a question for me. Is it possible? To my knowledge, it is, but I cannot confirm this definitely.
Yes, so you can add qualifiers indicating a time span to various statements. Yes,
including relations.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. That brings us to the last one. I'm not sure if you have thoughts on this, but someone's saying, I'm curious how the political parties in Hong Kong are aligned into an ideograph with their ideology, as the ruling party is obviously heavily influenced by the Chinese Communist Party in China.
Well, I suggest you could have a look at what it looks like on Ideograph. I probably would not do that live, but let's see if I have Hong Kong. Yeah, there is Hong Kong there. So select all. Update graph. But maybe it's not we don't have time to look at this live. So but there is a possibility. I'm going to do it like this. If you, can I share my screen briefly?
Sure.
Yeah. Screen 2. Yeah, the data is loading right now, but you can definitely select Hong Kong, and here it is. So you can have a look at this data. I don't know how pertinent it is. Again, it's the whole data is tributary of the data that's actually available on Wikidata, but you can have a look and see if this reflects the current situation in Hong Kong or not. You can definitely go to the individual parties, which are not many in this case, and have a look if this data is current or updated, up to date or not.
Thank you. That concludes the questions from the Etherpad. I have another question for all the presenters, which is, I've heard a lot from basically all of you that you would love if people support your projects by building out the data in Wikidata, keeping it up to date, making sure that it's correct and as fleshed out as needed for your projects. Are there other things you would like to see or that would be helpful for you? Any one of you can.
Yeah, so Holger speaking here. So from my perspective, maybe I have not seen it, but I would also kind of some learning efforts. So really like tutorials. Some of these things come up from the community now, but I have seen that with data science. So when modern tools like R or Python, so when they kind of really took off among younger social scientists, was also when there was a lot of learning material there. So this is one of the things that I think would also, except from the user interface parts and from the technical tools, kind of a structured learning material would make it more accessible.
Thank you. Jan.
Yes, so one way that, or one thing that could be improved is the way that you can monitor changes of data that are being used elsewhere. So right now we can do either listeria lists, you can put things on the watch list, but that's really hard if it's thousands of items. And we have the recent changes Sparkle query, but that's somewhere else as well you have to go. So better ways to natively track changes in large data sets. Perhaps could we add things to our watch list through a query or something like that? I guess you could do it in the raw thing. Yeah.
Yeah, but that's a good point. Keeping track of all the things that are changing that are relevant for your project. Anything else people can think of?
I mean, hi, this is Friedrich. I'm like, we're using the API, the GetObjects API, and it's fantastic. But one thing that would be really cool is to have the labels for adjacent properties and entities in there. So that basically I don't need to go and fetch the name of every university that a politician has been to individually. Or maybe that's possible already and I don't know how.
No, that is something that can be improved indeed, and that has been requested a few times already. Cool. We have another question for everyone, which is, do you need more properties in your field? And do you know how to propose them if you do?
I'll answer the second question, yes.
I often find myself wanting less properties, I must say. We have plenty of properties that overlaps and that are confusing not only to us, but to people who edit, and we see similarly things being modeled in very different ways because we have so many properties to select from. But it might also be a documentation thing.
That makes sense. So more consolidation would make things a bit easier for you in cases?
Yeah.
Cool. Anyone else got an answer to the do you have enough properties in your field question?
I think it would be not so much the lack of properties, but generally the facility to access information about the properties, or have some kind of visual tool or simplified tool to navigate through properties. Currently, what you have to do is to write Sparkle queries, sort of guess properties or make lists of predicates and try to generate those things yourself. And it would be really helpful to have some kind of graphical user interface to explore the different properties, so you don't have to write the code for this exploration. The exploration takes a lot of time.
Just a question to make sure I understand it correctly. You mean visually exploring which properties exist for your area of interest?
or yes, generally, yeah, a easier graphical user interface to navigate through the properties.
That makes sense.
I think that there was a gadget that showed, no, sorry, a tool in Toolforge that showed the class of the properties.
Yeah, Botti linked Prop Explorer on Toolforge in the chat.
Okay, yeah, that was it.
That is a useful thing to try. Cool. Any more questions for our presenters, or from the presenters, are there things where you think it makes sense for some of your projects to work together, where you see synergies and so on? Holger, yeah.
Yes, definitely. So as I said, I haven't had the resources yet, so I would love to add the Partifacts IDs as identifiers. So what we, and also what Sascha said at the beginning, so what we can provide is sometimes we have curated data sets, and we can, so through these we have an external quality check. And I also hope that we as scientists are better to collaborate with actors like Wikidata to improve this common good.
That sounds great. Does anyone else see areas for collaboration and synergies?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of synergies all around here in this field. I don't see anything specific right now for us, but we already sort of benefited mutually with the Wiki project Every Politician, because they are making the offices for the ministers, and we display that. And then also Wiki project Country Subdivision, which is also very useful, and we improve that data and complete their tasks as well. So it's very overlapping and mutually beneficial in this area.
Yeah, that is a very good point, which brings me to wiki projects. For the people who are less involved in the day-to-day activities of Wikidata, do check out wiki projects. There are many of them that bring together the people who really care about a particular set of data. And for example, Wiki project Every Politician is a really good starting point for the people interested in civic engagement and politics, for example. But there's a ton more, so whatever floats your boat, there's probably a wiki project for it. Anyone else wants to add something for this? Or do we have more questions from the audience? Also from the speakers. You're also welcome to interrogate the other speakers. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, so what are your plans for the next years? And when you look at this field here, so we had with, it was a political domain with the sanctions, politicians' informations, party profiles. So what is your agenda? And also, do you have the resources to keep up the good work?
Are you specifically asking me for the dev team, or?
Whoever is here and wants to reply on it.
Okay, I can start for the dev team, and then maybe others can add. So one of the things that is that's a very big topic is data quality and data utility. So ensuring that as Wikidata amasses more and more data, it's actually continues to stay maintainable by the editors and continues to stay a really good source of data for all your projects. And I think as Wikidata grows and is used in more and more of the project like yours, there's also more and more of an incentive, let's say, to manipulate it, right? And to change the data in ways that are maybe more beneficial for someone than we would as a society like that. So that is definitely an area where we are keeping a close eye on. And one of the things that we've recently released is the mismatch finder, which is one step in that direction to help us ensure that the data is very, very good and useful for all your projects. Anyone else wants to answer that question?
Maybe for the sanctions stuff specifically, I think one of the things I'd really like to do this year, if I can, is to try and build a thing that kind of mines news articles and links them up to Wikidata. I think like in the NLP space, there's a lot of tools for doing that, and I want to kind of apply it to specifically kind of corruption reporting. And I think that would be really cool in terms of kind of getting not just interesting people that are on sanctions lists, but also interesting people that are written about in the news and putting that in the database. And in terms of keeping that sustainable, we actually kind of, licensing out kind of those data dumps that we generate to commercial enterprises. So it's free to use for anyone who does it for like journalistic or activist uses, but other people were licensing the stuff. And that's kind of hopefully going to lead us towards some sustainability.
Thank you. Anyone else?
I guess for Govdirectory, we're working along on the wiki projects, making more data queryable, and when it gets high quality, we're editing it bit by bit to the website. So we don't have any plans for big improvements right now. So we'll just work along in our volunteer capacities.
And for anyone who doesn't know this, Jan and Albin are doing amazing streaming editing sessions. So if you want to see some live Wikidata editing with all the nerdiness that comes with it, those are cool. Go watch them.